Now I would like to give the word to Nikita Polishchuk, who is our financial analyst at PHC Advisory Tax Accounting, a company of the DP Group. He advises our clients for FTI in the APAC region, as well as on other matters such as taxation, HR, and fiscal compliance. Nikita, your turn to give us a quick overview on the subsidies and the tax incentives that foreign companies may enjoy with R&D in China. Thank you. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Veronica, for this nice introduction. Please allow me to share my screen, and of course, I'll be glad to discuss actually the tax incentives and the subsidies which are available to both domestic and foreign enterprises here in China. So actually, this is, I would say, as my colleague Mandy has mentioned, one of the key, let's say, topics which is brought up often by foreign enterprises at the stage of, actually affecting the investment in China, especially if they're engaged in so-called, high tech, or even, any technical or essentially very, very specialized areas. Okay, let me start with introducing today's agenda. I'm going to briefly focus on mentioning a few general things about research and development activities in China, and afterwards I will mention the notion of what is basically a high-tech enterprise, and how it is closely correlated with the research and development activities in China. The next topic, which is the key, I would say, of today's presentation for me, is the tax incentives. Some of the specific tax incentives that I will mention, they are related to primarily research and development expenses. Later on, I will go into talking a little bit about subsidies in some of the major cities in China, such as Shanghai and Beijing, and then focus on other areas. And then I provide you with some of the key takeaways. So first, as my colleague Mandy has mentioned, indeed, the investment in research and development in China has been one of the key and one of the targets of the authorities here. For instance, actually, the focus of the 14th five-year plan of the Chinese authorities has been put, a lot of stress has been put on the issues of sustainability, as well as ecological development. But also, of course, it's closely correlated with issues such as, basically topics such as research and development, and the increased amount of investment is being put into that direction. Furthermore, the introduction of the foreign investment law in 2020, as well as the elimination of some of the ownership limits in the many industries in China, has promoted and facilitated further foreign direct investment in research and development activities. And this, this is very important, especially for these, high technology companies and companies operating in certain sensitive industries. Because if, for example, previously in some of the industries, you actually had to have a local partner. So basically, you had to form so-called joint venture, where you would share a lot of things with your local partner, including some of the technologies that you may bring into China. And these issues, it has created, based on our experience and based on the things that have been here previously, it has created a number of issues in the past and could have resulted in certain even legal disputes. So that's why it's very important for foreign investors now that some of the ownership limits have been completely eliminated. They can establish the fully owned subsidiary here in China, and sort of have this peace of mind when operating in research and development activities. And I want to mention that a number of policy measures, some of which include those I will mention later on, such as tax incentives and subsidies, they came into effect at the end of 2020 on December 1st. Before going into these specific tax incentives, I would like to mention also the fact that the status of high-tech enterprises in China is something which is desired by many multinationals operating in a number of industries, but it is not easy to obtain. And the research and development activities actually play a key role in obtaining this high-tech status, the so-called high-tech status, to those innovative enterprises that actually can obtain. So meaning that I'm not going to go into the specifics on how to actually obtain this status. But just to mention, for example, research and development expenses should be a certain percentage of your activities in your annual operations. So it is actually quantifiable, as well as there should be certain qualitative assessment made by the authority to actually qualify for this high tax status. And by obtaining this high tax status, those enterprises would be actually eligible for a number of subsidies, a number of tax incentives, additional tax incentives, besides the common ones, and also other financial aid from the government. And indeed, local authorities would actually encourage investment by multinational companies, by large innovative enterprises, but also by so-called innovative startups to facilitate the research and development here in China. And I want to mention that these policies would range from city to city, from industrial zone to industrial zone, from one park to another park. So actually, let's say due diligence on the first step and subsequent negotiation with the local authorities is something that I would say of a must. And this is something that we at the DP Group, PHC Advisory, together with Dall'Olio Partners Legal Counsel, this is something that we facilitate for our clients here in China. And then going into I would say the key policies which are very attractive, which are very attractive for foreign investors, are research and development tax incentives. And the first I would mention is actually a preferential corporate income tax rate. Again, this is related more to a high-tech enterprise with certain research and development expenses. So for those which are recognized as high-tech enterprises, the corporate income tax, or CIT rate, has been reduced from the standard 25% to 15%. And this policy can be enjoyed for the 3 consecutive years. And after this period expired, there is let's say, some kind of how should we put, evaluation made by the authorities, this review of your activities. And if let's say both parties come to a conclusion that everything is going in order and still the high-tech status is maintained, the research and development activities are taking place, the enterprise can enjoy further reduced CIT rate of 15% for the next cycle of 3 consecutive years. Next is research and development expenses deduction, and that is 75% of the actual amount of R&D expense will be deducted before filing for corporate income tax. And if in a given year an intangible assets are formed, so actually your research and development expenses are resulted into, let's say, invention of something, so you have created something and you capitalize it, and you have created an asset, intangible asset as a result of it, 175% of the cost of these intangible assets would be amortized before tax during the above period, which means reducing your tax burden in a given year. And there's a notion of so-called additional R&D expenses deduction, and those 50% of those additional R&D expenses can be deducted. And once again, if intangible assets are formed, 150% of the cost of these assets would be amortized in a given year. And then I would like to mention, which is actually very important for many, for example, of our clients, and also for many of prospective clients here in China, those operating in the manufacturing. So those manufacturers can enjoy actually 100% of the R&D expense amount deduction before CIT filing. I want to mention that it's pretty, strict in order how to define a manufacturer, and one of these criterion is actually having 50% of your basically turnover in a year derived from the production and sales of manufacturing equipment. So it cannot be, from, let's say, service or support or maintenance. It has to be at least 50% of it has to come from the manufacturing activity. And lastly, are those research and development expenses deduction, which are related to the tech or high-tech small and medium enterprises, basically high-tech startups. They can deduct research and development expenses at a rate of 100%. So as you can see, for many, let's say, high-tech enterprises, for many auto manufacturers which have research and development expenses on their balance sheet, these reductions can be significant because it is actually, part of the criteria to qualify for high-tech enterprise. And usually these expenses form a significant part of general annual expense. and actually having an additional deduction available to those enterprises can significantly reduce your tax burden. Then I will go into subsidies. I just want to briefly mention some subsidies, original subsidies, in fact, which would vary based on the city, but also on a specific district. And for example, in Shanghai, enterprises would have a support fund of 300,000 RMB, which are identified for the first time as high-tech enterprises with research and development activity. For example, in Copan district, it is set at 300,000 RMB. And in Shanghai district, for example, at 250,000 RMB. So as you can see, it would depend on specific district. It would also depend on exact terms that you could or you would achieve with the local authorities. As you can see, for example, here on this slide, actually this is a famous Tesla Research and Development Center, which has already been completed and is fully operational here in Shanghai. For example, when it comes to subsidies in Beijing, also it has quite, let's say, adjustable, requirements and criteria. For example, if research and development expenses in 2021 were above 5 million RMB and increased those research and development expenses by 5 million RMB compared to last year, there would be a financial support again of, let's say, 300,000 RMB provided to those enterprises, qualifying enterprises. And if the increase has been between 1 million to 5 million, a financial support of no more than 200,000 can be provided. And this is a similar case, before January 1st, 2020, and also after January 1st, 2020. And again, this is just, I want to emphasize, this is just an example of some of the policies which could be available, for example, in this case in Beijing. Again, you will have to look at the specific, let's say, industrial park, also to understand a bit more in details what specific R&D, policies, tax incentives would be available. Also, it would depend on the industry in which your company operates. And generally speaking, for the developing areas, let's say so-called rural areas and let's say so-called tier 2, tier 3 cities, there are even more incentives and subsidies available on top of those which are applied across the whole country. And I just highlighted 3 main categories of those incentives available. And the first one are those so-called annual subsidies. So as you have seen previously on the previous slide, for example, in Shanghai and Beijing, those so-called financial support, financial aid is actually a one-off payment. Unlike in, actually, you could achieve even better terms in, let's say, certain developing areas where you could be provided even annual subsidies. These annual subsidies could be in the form of funds or financing, could apply to both enterprise, but also to certain, staff and personnel as well. There can be further additional research and development expense deductions, as we have seen for the tax incentive. It could have been increased even further. And lastly, those so-called bonus awards. The bonus awards is again something a bit subjective and could be provided to, let's say, the most outstanding enterprise, let's say, in a given region, in a given city. As you know, something which is an enterprise which is leading the industry and also, let's say, providing, the jobs to the local people. And again, the authorities would greatly encourage this. So this is again something to keep in mind when investing in China and when choosing the geographical location of your future R&D, for example, R&D center. And just some of the key takeaways for today. Of course, China wants and does encourage independent research and development activities by facilitating foreign direct investment here in China in many various forms. I want to mention again that threshold to qualify for high-tech enterprises status. Those thresholds are quite significant. Nevertheless, it doesn't mean they're not achievable. And the specific scope of those, R&D expenses, policies, and incentives, they would include, for example, encouraging and providing, certain subsidies for personnel, labor costs, for direct input costs, on depreciation expenses, amortization of intangible assets, as has been previously mentioned, and of course, a lot of focus is put on the new product design, new specification, clinical trial in certain industries, and other development technology, which is basically what is bringing the new, which is, let's say, opening the new horizon in many industries. And a lot of these companies which are let's say, engaged in this activity, they will receive a number of financial support from the authorities here in China. And that's all for my today's presentation. Thank you very much for listening. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask them in the Q&A session or contact us directly. Thank you.
Thank you, Nikita, for these very detailed insights on what are the pros and the pros of having an R&D center in China. Hopefully, more companies, more foreign investors will decide to accept these offers from China and to set up the R&D, because it seems really interesting. Thank you very much.